They told me I was replaceable after 28 years, after more than 11,000 lifts without a single lost time incident, after I had personally trained half the crane operators working in this state, a 31-year-old kid in a polo shirt and khakis who had never once set foot on an active construction site before his first day as our new supervisor looked me dead in the eyes and told me that I was, and I quote, a budget inefficiency that the company can no longer justify. Those were his exact words. Budget inefficiency. Like I was a line item on a spreadsheet. Like I was an expired subscription he was canceling to save a few dollars a month. My name is Earl. I am not going to give you my last name, and I am not going to name the company because, frankly, the lawyers have already had enough fun with this whole situation, and I do not need to add to it. But I will tell you my story, every single detail of it, because what happened on that job site is something that every single person who has ever been disrespected by an incompetent boss needs to hear. Let me start at the beginning because you need to understand what 28 years of experience actually means in my line of work. I am a certified crane operator. I hold current certifications from the National Commission for the Certification of Crane Operators in Mobile Hydraulic, Lattice Boom Crawler, Lattice Boom Truck, and Tower Crane categories. I have additional specialized certifications for heavy lift planning, rigging, supervision, and critical lift management. I have operated cranes on bridges, on high rises, on dam construction, on refinery turnarounds, on wind turbine installations, and on projects so sensitive that a quarter-inch deviation in placement would have cost someone their life. I started in this industry when I was 22 years old. My father was an iron worker, and his father before him was a rigger on the docks in Baltimore. I grew up understanding that heavy equipment is not a toy. It is not a video game. When you are sitting in the cab of a 200-ton crawler crane and you have a steel beam dangling from your hook at 150 feet in the air, and the wind is gusting at 14 miles per hour, and your rigger on the ground is giving you signals that you have to interpret perfectly because one wrong move means that beam swings into a concrete column and kills someone, you are not a budget line item. You are the only thing standing between a normal Tuesday and a catastrophe that makes the evening news. I joined this particular company, let us call them Meridian Construction, 14 years ago. They were a mid-sized general contractor specializing in commercial and institutional projects, hospitals, schools, parking structures, office buildings, that kind of work. When I came on board, they were running about $30 million a year in projects. By the time this whole disaster happened, they were pushing close to 80 million. And I am not saying that was all because of me, but I will say this, in 14 years, Meridian had never once had a crane incident, not a tip over, not a drop load, not a tube blocking event, not a single OSJ citation related to crane operations. Their experience modification rate, which is the number that insurance companies use to judge how safe a contractor is, was a 0.72. That is exceptional. That is the kind of number that wins you bids on federal projects. That is the kind of number that saves you hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in insurance premiums. And do you want to know why that number was so good? Because I did not cut corners, ever. Not once. Every single lift I performed started with a written lift plan. I calculated the load weight, the rigging weight, the boom angle, the radius, the net capacity, the wind speed, the ground bearing pressure, every single variable, and I documented all of it before the crane engine even turned over. My pre-shift inspections took 5 minutes. My post-shift inspections took 30. I personally checked every sling, every shackle, every wire rope, every hydraulic line, every outrigger pad, every pin, every bolt. I walked the ground. I checked the soil. I watched the weather. I talked to every rigger, every signal person, every iron worker who would be anywhere near my lift radius. I was meticulous, methodical, and absolutely relentless about safety. Some guys thought I was slow. Some of the younger project managers would grumble that my lifts took too long, that I was being overly cautious, that I was costing the scheduled time. And you know what I told every single one of them? I told them the same thing my father told me when I was 12 years old and watching him walk steel beams 200 feet above the Chesapeake Bay. He said, son, there is no such thing as being too careful when gravity is the enemy. You respect the physics, or the physics will kill you, and it will not feel sorry about it. For 14 years, every superintendent, every project manager, every site foreman at Meridian understood this. They understood that my pace was not slowness. It was precision. They understood that my safety protocols were not excessive. They were the reason nobody had ever gone home in an ambulance from one of my job sites. They understood my value. They respected my expertise. They let me do my job. And then Bradley showed up. I am going to call him Bradley because that is close enough to his real name without being exactly his real name. Bradley was 31 years old. He had a Master of Business Administration from a decent state university. He had spent the previous 4 years working in operations management for a logistics company, which, as far as I could ever determine, meant he had managed a warehouse where people drove forklifts around and loaded trucks. He had never worked in construction. He had never set foot on an active job site. He did not know what a lattice boom was. He did not know the difference between a choker hitch and a basket hitch. He did not know what a load chart was. He could not have told you the difference between a crawler crane and a rough terrain crane if his life depended on it. And in a very real way, other people's lives were about to depend on it. Bradley was hired by Meridian's corporate office as the new site supervisor for our biggest project to date, a 7-story, 420 space parking structure for a regional hospital expansion. This was an $18 million project. It involved precast concrete double T-beams, some of them weighing 26 tons each, that had to be lifted into precise positions and set on corbels with tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. It was the most complex, most demanding, most dangerous project Meridian had ever taken on. It required a crane operator who knew exactly what he was doing every second of every lift. It required someone like me. The reason corporate hired Bradley, instead of promoting one of the experienced superintendents we already had, was simple: money. Meridian had been acquired 8 months earlier by a private equity group, and the new ownership had one priority, and one priority only: cut costs, increase margins, and make the numbers look good enough to flip the company to a larger firm within 3 years. They did not care about safety records. They did not care about EMR ratings. They did not care about the 28 years of knowledge sitting in my head. They cared about the bottom line, and they brought in Bradley to sharpen the pencil. I remember the first time I met him. It was a Monday morning, 7 o'clock at the job site trailer. I had already been there since 6:15. I had already completed my pre-shift crane inspection. I had already reviewed the lift plan for the day's picks. I had already checked the weather forecast twice, noted that afternoon winds were expected to gust to 18 miles per hour, and made a note to suspend lifting operations by 1:30 p.m. as a precaution. I was drinking my second cup of coffee and going over the rigging plan with my signal person, a young woman named Danny, who was one of the best I had ever worked with, when the trailer door opened and in walked Bradley. He was wearing brand new steel-toed boots that had clearly never touched dirt. He had on a crisp pair of tan cargo pants, a blue company polo shirt still creased from the packaging, and a white hard hat so clean you could have eaten off it. He had a laptop bag over one shoulder and a Starbucks cup in his hand. He walked in, looked around the trailer like he was sizing up a hotel room, and his very first words to me were, "So you're the crane guy. We need to talk about your hours." Not "hello," not "nice to meet you," not "I'm the new supervisor. I'm looking forward to working with you." No, his first words to me were about my hours. I set my coffee down. I looked at him. I extended my hand and said, "I'm Earl. I've been running crane on this site for the last 3 months. Welcome aboard." He shook my hand limply, the way people do when they have never done manual labor and do not understand that a handshake is supposed to mean something. And he sat down at the desk across from me and opened his laptop. "According to the payroll records," he said, not even looking at me, "you're billing 62 hours a week on average. The budget allocated for crane operations on this project is based on 45 hours a week. That's a 17-hour per week variance. Over the remaining 9 months of this project, that variance represents approximately $63,000 in unbudgeted labor costs." I stared at him. I waited a moment because I wanted to make sure I had heard him correctly. Then I said, very calmly, "Those extra hours are my inspection time, pre-shift and post-shift. They're required by OSHA 29 CFR 1926 subpart CC, and they're required by our company's own safety manual, and they're required by the crane manufacturer's operating guidelines. I do not skip inspections, ever." He finally looked up from his laptop. He had this expression on his face, this smug little half smile that I would come to know very well over the next 3 weeks. It was the expression of a man who believes that his spreadsheet is smarter than your experience. He said, "I'm not asking you to skip anything, Earl. I'm asking you to be more efficient. 45 minutes for a pre-shift inspection is excessive. The manufacturer's checklist has 32 items on it. That should take 15 minutes, 20 tops. And the post shift, that's redundant. If the crane was fine at the start of the day, it's fine at the end of the day. I took a very deep breath. I counted to 5 in my head the way I always do when someone says something so profoundly ignorant that my first instinct is to say something I will regret. Then I said, Bradley, with all due respect, that crane is a 200-ton Liber LR 1130. It has over 2,000 individual components that are subject to wear, stress, fatigue, and failure. The manufacturer's checklist is a minimum baseline. It is not a comprehensive inspection. I check things that are not on that list because I have 28 years of experience knowing what can go wrong and where to look for it. And the post-shift inspection is not redundant. A crane that has been operating under load for 10 hours has experienced stresses and conditions that did not exist at the start of the day. Wire ropes stretch, sheaves wear. Hydraulic seals can develop micro leaks. Boom pins can shift. These are things that need to be caught before the next morning, not discovered during the first pick when there is a 26-ton concrete beam in the air. He listened to me the way a teenager listens to a parent explaining why they cannot stay out past midnight, politely, dismissively, already certain that he knew better. Then he typed something on his laptop, looked back up at me, and said, I'll take that under advisement. But going forward, I need you to keep your weekly hours at or below 48. That's the new target. That was day one. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated quickly. Bradley was not just ignorant. He was aggressively ignorant. He was the most dangerous kind of incompetent person, one who has just enough authority to be destructive and just enough confidence to believe he is being constructive. On day 3, he questioned why I'd stopped the lift mid-pick. The reason was that Donnie, my signal person, had given me the emergency stop signal because a laborer had walked into the fall zone without authorization. This is a life or death situation. If that beam had shifted, if the rigging had failed, if anything had gone wrong at that exact moment, that laborer would have been crushed like an aluminum can under 26 tons of concrete. I stopped the lift, we secured the load, we cleared the area, and we resumed 20 minutes later after a safety stand down. That is exactly what you are supposed to do. It is textbook. Bradley called me into the trailer afterward and asked me why I had shut down operations for 20 minutes over someone walking through the area. I explained in detail what a fall zone is, what the OSA requirements are, what the consequences of a rigging failure in that scenario would have been, and why the safety stand down was necessary. His response was, that seems like an overreaction. People walk through construction sites all the time. That's why they wear hard hats. I did not even know what to say to that. A hard hat. He thought a hard hat would protect someone from a 26-ton beam falling from 100 feet. A hard hat. I looked at Danny. She looked at me. We shared a look that said everything without saying a word. We both knew in that moment that Bradley was going to get someone killed if he was not stopped. On day 5, he tried to change the lift plan. We had a particularly complex pick scheduled. A double T-beam that had to be threaded between 2 already erected columns with less than 8 inches of clearance on either side. I had spent 2 hours the previous evening working on the lift plan. I had calculated the exact boom angle, the exact radius, the exact swing path. I had accounted for the beam's center of gravity, which was offset due to its asymmetrical shape. I had specified a 4-point rigging configuration with taglines on each end to control rotation. It was going to be a slow, careful, precise operation, and I estimated it would take about 45 minutes from pick to set. Bradley looked at the lift plan and said, 45 minutes for one beam. That's way too long. Can't you just pick it up, swing it over, and set it down? It shouldn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes. I explained very patiently that the 8-inch clearance was the reason for the extended time. That if the beam contacted one of the existing columns during the swing, it could crack the column, compromise its structural integrity, and potentially cause a partial collapse of the section we had already erected. That the offset center of gravity meant the beam would want to rotate during the lift, and the taglines were the only thing that would prevent that rotation. That rushing this particular pick was not just inadvisable, it was genuinely dangerous. He waved his hand at me. Literally waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly. He said, fine, do it your way, but I'm documenting this as a schedule impact. Document away, Bradley. I would rather have paperwork than a funeral. On day 8, he brought up my pay for the first time. We were in a morning meeting with the project engineer and the concrete foreman, and Bradley, apparently unable to resist the opportunity to assert his authority in front of an audience, said, and I quote, I've been reviewing the labor cost breakdown, And I have to be honest, I was shocked to see what we're paying for crane operations. Earl, you're billing at $92 an hour with benefits. That's nearly double what some operators at other companies charge. I think we need to have a conversation about bringing that number in line with market rates. The concrete foreman, a guy named Mick who had been in construction for 35 years and who had worked with me on at least a dozen projects, actually laughed out loud. Not a polite chuckle, a full laugh. He said, "You want to pay market rate? Market rate gets you a market rate operator. Earl is not market rate. Earl is the reason this crane hasn't killed anybody in 14 years. You pay Earl whatever Earl wants, and you say thank you while you're writing the check." Bradley did not appreciate that comment. His face went red, and he made a note on his laptop. I could see him typing. I did not know it at the time, but he was already building his case. He was already looking for my replacement. Tofa fiesta cito forte eskerti, peritone etiest econify CT, and Keylimics on day 11. Bradley brought his nephew to the job site. His name was Tyler. He was 23 years old. He had, according to Bradley, extensive equipment operating experience. When I asked Tyler directly what equipment he had operated, he told me he had 4 months on a warehouse forklift and had done some stuff with a skid steer on his uncle's friend's property. That was it. That was his extensive experience. A forklift and a skid steer. He did not have a crane operator certification. He did not have a rigger certification. He did not have an OSA 10 hour card. He did not have a CDL. He had nothing. He was a 23-year-old kid who, from what I could tell, was a perfectly nice young man, but who had absolutely no business being within 50 feet of a 200-ton crawler crane, much less sitting in the cab and operating it. Bradley introduced Tyler to me and said, "I want you to start training him. He's a quick learner. I think with a couple weeks of on the job training, he'll be able to handle the routine picks, and we can use you only for the more complex ones. That'll save us about 40% on crane labor costs." I stood there for a long moment. I looked at Tyler. Tyler, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He looked at the crane behind me, all 200 tons and 260 feet of lattice boom reaching into the sky, and I could see in his eyes that he understood on some instinctive level that this was not a forklift. This was something else entirely. I turned back to Bradley. I kept my voice calm and even. I said, "Bradley, it takes a minimum of 3 to 5 years of supervised training and experience to become a competent crane operator. The NCCCO certification process requires documented operational hours, classroom training, written examinations, and practical evaluations. You cannot train someone to operate a 200-ton crawler crane in 2 weeks. You cannot train someone to operate any crane in 2 weeks. This is not a reasonable request. It is not a safe request. And if you put an uncertified, untrained person in the cab of that crane and they make a pick, you are in violation of federal OSHA regulations, the crane manufacturer's operational requirements, and our company's own safety policies, and you are putting every single person on this job site at risk of serious injury or death." Bradley smiled at me. That smug, infuriating, "I have an MBA and you are just a tradesman" smile. And he said the words that I will never forget for as long as I live. "Earl, I appreciate your passion, but I think you're being a little dramatic. Operating a crane is basically just pulling levers and pushing buttons. The controls are labeled. The load charts are printed right there in the cab. Tyler is a smart kid. He'll figure it out. And frankly, at $92 an hour, you're pricing yourself out of a job. The industry is changing. We need to adapt. Pulling levers and pushing buttons." That is what he said. 28 years of my life, 11,000 lifts, the accumulated knowledge of reading wind, feeling load dynamics through the seat of my pants, knowing by sound alone when a hydraulic pump is starting to cavitate, understanding the geometry of rigging in 3 dimensions, knowing how a lattice boom flexes under load and how that flex changes with temperature and wind and the age of the structural pins. All of that reduced to pulling levers and pushing buttons by a man who, 3 weeks ago, did not know what a lattice boom was. I looked at Danny. She had her arms crossed. Her jaw was clenched. I could see she was furious on my behalf, but she was also scared. Scared because she was a signal person, and the signal person's life depends on the crane operator's competence just as much as anyone else's. I looked at Mick, the concrete foreman, who had stopped what he was doing to listen. He shook his head slowly, his expression a mixture of disgust and disbelief. I looked at Tyler. Tyler was staring at his shoes. And then I made my decision. I did not yell. I did not argue. I did not threaten. I had spent 28 years controlling the most powerful machines on any job site, And I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you can do in a crisis is stay calm, I said, Bradley. I want to make sure I understand your direction clearly, and I want to make sure that everyone present hears it. You are directing me to train an uncertified, inexperienced individual to operate a 200-ton crawler crane on an active job site where we are performing critical lifts of precast concrete elements weighing up to 26 tons at heights up to 70 feet in close proximity to existing structural elements and occupied hospital buildings. Is that correct? He blinked. Something in my tone, the formal precision of it, the way I was clearly laying out the facts for future reference, seemed to make him uneasy for just a moment. But then the arrogance took over again, and he said, "Yes, that's the plan. Is there a problem?" I nodded. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the email app and typed a message to Bradley, CCing the project manager, the company's safety director, and the regional vice president. The email read, "Per your verbal direction given on this date at approximately 7:45 a.m. in the presence of witnesses including Danny Martinez, signal person, and Mick Callahan, concrete foreman, you have directed me to train Tyler Morrison, who possesses no crane operator certification, no documented crane operating experience, and no OSE safety training, to operate the Liber LR 1130 crawler crane on the regional hospital parking structure project. I am formally objecting to this direction on the grounds that it violates OSHA Regulation 29 CFR 1920 6.1477, the manufacturer's operational requirements, and the company's written safety policies. I am documenting this objection for the record. Please confirm receipt of this email and provide a written response." I hit send right there in front of him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his face changed. The smugness faded, replaced by something harder, something angry. "You didn't need to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," I said. "And I need you to understand something, Bradley. I have cooperated with every one of your directives over the past 11 days. I have reduced my inspection times as much as I can without compromising safety. I have documented every schedule impact you asked me to document. I have been professional and patient. But this is a line I cannot cross. I will not train an unqualified person to operate this crane. If you want to override my objection, you will need to put it in writing, and you will need to get the safety director's approval. That is the company's own procedure." He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "You know what, Earl? I think we've reached the end of the road here. I'm going to recommend to corporate that we bring in a contract operator at a competitive rate. Someone who is a team player. Someone who understands that this is a business, not a personal fiefdom. I'll give you the option to finish out the week." There it was. After 14 years, after zero incidents, after an EMR that had saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in insurance premiums, after every bridge, every high rise, every critical lift, every storm, every crisis, every moment where my expertise was the only thing standing between a normal day and a catastrophe. After all of that, I was being let go because a 31-year-old MBA with 11 days of construction experience thought I was too expensive and too difficult. I said, "I'll finish today. I'll do the picks that are planned for this morning. After that, I'll secure the crane, complete my final inspection, and turn in my keys. I want to be clear that I am not resigning. I am being terminated. I want that documented." Bradley said, "Fine. Whatever." I turned to Danny. She had tears in her eyes, but she was too tough to let them fall. I said, "Danny, it's been an honor working with you. You're the best signal person I've ever had." She nodded, pressed her lips together, and walked out of the trailer. I turned to Mick. He looked like he wanted to put his fist through the wall. He said, "Earl, this is wrong. This is dead wrong." I shook his hand and said, "I know it is Mick, but it's not my call anymore." I completed 3 picks that morning. Each one was flawless, as always. I set the last double T-beam at 10:40, 5 a.m. with a 1/4-inch tolerance. I swung the boom to the rest position, lowered the hook, shut down the engine, climbed out of the cab for the last time, and did my final post shift inspection. Every note, every reading, every observation documented and filed. I turned in my keys to Bradley, who took them without looking up from his laptop. I packed my personal tools into my truck, and I drove away from that job site. I did not look back, but I knew with every fiber of my being that something terrible was going to happen. I was right. It just happened faster than I expected. 13 days later, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, I was sitting on my back porch drinking iced tea and reading a book about the history of bridge construction in America when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized. It was Danny. I answered. Before I could even say hello, she said, Earl. The crane went over. Tyler was operating it. He exceeded the load chart radius on a 24-ton pick. The boom buckled at the midsection, and the whole thing went sideways. It came down on the east wing of the parking structure. 4 bays collapsed. The crane is destroyed. It's lying on its side in a pile of rubble. My blood went cold. The first question out of my mouth was, Has anyone hurt? She paused. Then she said, 2 iron workers were on the level below. They're at the hospital. One has a broken leg and broken ribs. She paused again. The other one took a piece of concrete to the back. They're saying possible spinal injury. They don't know yet if he'll walk again. I sat down. I put my hand over my face. I sat there for a long time without speaking. Danny was quiet on the other end of the line. Finally, I said, Tell me everything. And she did. She told me everything that had happened in the 13 days since I left. Bradley had not hired a certified contract operator. Instead, he had put Tyler through what he called an accelerated familiarization program, which, from what Donnie described, consisted of Tyler sitting in the cab while one of the other equipment operators, a guy who ran an excavator and had zero crane experience, showed him where the controls were. There was no formal training. There was no written assessment. There was no practical evaluation. There was no supervision by a certified trainer. Tyler was, in every meaningful sense of the word, completely unqualified and unsupervised. For the first week, Tyler only made small picks. Materials, bundles of rebar, concrete forms, light stuff. And even then, there were problems. He swung too fast. He didn't account for load swing. He set materials down too hard. He didn't communicate properly with the signal person. Danny told me she had refused to act as signal person for Tyler after the 3rd day because she felt unsafe. Bradley had replaced her with a laborer who had no signal person training. Danny had filed a written safety complaint with the company. It was ignored. In the 2nd week, Bradley put Tyler on the structural picks, the double T beams, 24 to 20, 6 tons each. The same beams that I had spent hours planning each lift for, calculating every variable, double checking every number. Tyler did not do lift plans. Bradley told him they were optional and took too long. Tyler did not check the load charts. He did not calculate the radius. He did not account for the boom angle. He just picked up the beams and swung them. On the day of the collapse, Tyler was making a pick at a radius that exceeded the crane's rated capacity for that boom length and angle by approximately 15%. 15%. In crane operations, even a 5% overload is extremely dangerous. 15% is suicidal. The crane's load moment indicator, which is the computer system designed to warn the operator when they are approaching or exceeding capacity, had been alarming repeatedly, and Tyler, not understanding what the alarm meant, had asked Bradley about it. Bradley told him to override it. He told him to press the bypass button. The bypass button exists for specific, documented, emergency scenarios and requires written authorization from the crane manufacturer to use. Bradley told the 23-year-old kid with no training to press it. Tyler pressed it. He made the pick. The boom loaded beyond its structural capacity. The midsection buckled. 260 feet of lattice steel folded like a paper straw. The boom came down in an arc, carrying the 24-ton beam with it, and struck the east wing of the parking structure on the 3rd level. The impact shattered 4 precast bays. Concrete, steel, and debris rained down onto the level below, where 2 ironworkers were tying rebar for the next pour. One of them saw it coming and dove behind a column, which saved his life, but did not prevent the broken leg and ribs from the flying debris. The other one did not see it coming. The crane itself toppled onto its side. The counterweight, 80,000 pounds of cast iron, tore free from the car body and rolled 30 feet across the site, coming to rest against the temporary construction fence that separated the job site from the hospital's active parking lot. If it had gone through that fence, if it had rolled another 20 feet into a parking lot full of cars belonging to hospital patients and visitors, the death toll could have been catastrophic. Tyler was in the cab when the crane went over. The cab struck the ground at an angle and the safety glass shattered. He was wearing his seatbelt, which saved his life, but he suffered a concussion, lacerations to his face and arms, and a dislocated shoulder. He was pulled from the cab by the rescue team in a state of complete shock, reportedly repeating the same phrase over and over. He told me to press the button. He told me to press the button. The job site was shut down immediately. OSA was on site within 3 hours. The State Occupational Safety Office was there the next morning. The crane manufacturer sent an engineering investigation team within 48 hours. The hospital, whose active facility was less than 100 yards from the collapse zone, filed a cease and desist and began legal proceedings against Meridian within a week. I learned all of this from Danny over the course of 2 phone calls. I sat in my living room and I processed it. I was angry. I was heartbroken. I was furious at Bradley for his arrogance. I was furious at corporate for hiring him. I was furious at the system that allowed this to happen. But mostly, I was devastated for the two ironworkers who had gone to work that morning thinking it was just another day and who were now lying in hospital beds because a man who did not know the difference between a choker hitch and a basket hitch had decided that my expertise was a budget inefficiency. 4 days after the collapse, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I answered it. It was the regional vice president of Meridian Construction, the same regional vice president I had CC'd on my email objecting to Bradley's directive to train Tyler, the same regional vice president who had never responded to that email. His name was Martin. His voice sounded like he had not slept in 4 days, which he probably had not. He said, "Earl, it's Martin. I, I know I have no right to call you, but we're in serious trouble, and I need to ask you something." I waited. He said, "OSHA has shut down the site. The crane is destroyed. We have a partially collapsed structure that needs to be stabilized before it collapses further. We need to bring in a new crane to remove the debris and the wrecked boom sections, and no crane company will send an operator to work on this site because our insurance has been suspended pending investigation. Our EMR is going to go through the roof. We can't get a certified operator to touch this job, and the hospital is threatening to terminate the contract entirely, which would bankrupt us. Earl, I need you to come back. I'll pay whatever you want. I need you to supervise the recovery operation. You're the only person I trust to do this safely." I let the silence hang for a long time. Then I said, "Martin, I sent you an email 13 days ago. In that email, I documented exactly what was going to happen. I told you that putting an untrained, uncertified operator in that crane was a violation of federal law and company policy. I told you that people would get hurt. You did not respond. You did not intervene. You let Bradley fire me. You let him put Tyler in that cab. And now 2 men are in the hospital, one of whom may never walk again. You want me to come back and fix this. I want to know one thing first. Where is Bradley?" Martin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Bradley was terminated the day of the incident. He's been served with a personal OSHA citation. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case for potential criminal negligence charges." I nodded, even though he could not see me. I said, "And Tyler? Tyler is a mess, Earl. He's physically recovering, but mentally he's destroyed. He keeps saying he didn't know. He keeps saying Bradley told him to do it. His family has hired a lawyer." I closed my eyes. Tyler was a victim too. He was a kid who trusted his uncle's authority over his own instincts. He knew deep down that he had no business in that cab. But he was young, and he wanted to impress his family. And the man in charge told him it was fine. Bradley had not just destroyed a crane in a building. He had destroyed that kid's life. I took the job. But I did it my way. I came back as an independent consultant, not as an employee. My rate was $210 an hour, non-negotiable. I brought my own team, including Danny, whom I hired directly. I required full written authority over all crane and rigging operations on the site with no interference from any supervisor, project manager, or corporate executive. I required a written acknowledgement from Meridian's CEO that my operational decisions were final and could not be overridden. And I required that my original email, the one where I objected to Bradley's directive, be included in the official incident investigation file. They agreed to every single condition without a single word of pushback. The recovery operation took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of the most painstaking, dangerous, technically demanding crane work I have ever performed in my career. We brought in a 350-ton Manitowoc crawler to remove the destroyed boom sections and the debris. Every pick was a critical lift. Every load was unbalanced, unpredictable, tangled in rebar and shattered concrete. We worked in conditions where a secondary collapse was a constant threat, and we did it without a single additional incident. Not one. The final cost of the disaster was staggering. Let me break it down for you, because I think it is important that people understand exactly how much money Bradley's cutting actually cost. The Liber LR 1130 crawler crane was a total loss. Replacement cost $3.8 million. The 4 collapsed bays of the parking structure had to be demolished down to the foundations and completely rebuilt. Cost $2.1 million. The OSHA fines totaled $478,000. Meridian's insurance premiums tripled, which represented an additional cost of approximately $1.2 million over the following 3 years. The hospital settlement, which covered their legal costs, project delays, and reputational damages, was $1.6 million. The two injured ironworkers' workers' compensation and legal claims totaled, as of the last information I have, approximately $2.3 million, and the case for the ironworker with the spinal injury is still ongoing. The recovery operation, including my fees, the rental of the replacement crane, and the labor for the 11-week stabilization and debris removal, cost $1.1 million. The total cost of Bradley's decision to replace me with his unqualified nephew, approximately $12.5 million on an $18 million project. He was trying to save $63,000 in labor costs, $63,000, and it cost them $12.5 million. But the real cost was not measured in dollars. The real cost was a 34-year-old ironworker named Jesse who spent 6 months in rehabilitation and who, as of the last time I spoke to Mick, has regained partial use of his legs but will never work construction again. Jesse has 2 daughters. They are 7 and 9. Their father cannot pick them up anymore because a man with an MBA decided that operating a crane was just pulling levers and pushing buttons. I want to say something directly to every person listening to this. If you are in a position of authority over people whose work you do not understand, listen to me very carefully. Your spreadsheet does not know more than their experience. Your MBA does not outweigh their expertise. Your desire to cut costs does not supersede their obligation to keep people alive. When an expert tells you that something is dangerous, your job is not to override them. Your job is not to find a cheaper alternative. Your job is to shut up and listen, because the consequences of your arrogance will not fall on you. They will fall on the people who trusted you to make safe decisions, the workers on the ground, the operators in the cab, the families waiting at home. I am 61 years old now. I still operate cranes. I will probably operate cranes until the day my hands can no longer hold the controls or my eyes can no longer read the load chart. I have never had a lost time incident in my entire career. I have never dropped a load. I have never tipped a crane, and I charge whatever I charge, and I take however long I take, and I do not apologize for it. Because the alternative is a collapsed crane, a destroyed building, and a man who cannot pick up his daughters. Bradley, as far as I know, works in retail management now. He never set foot on another construction site. Tyler got therapy, got his life together, and last I heard, he is working as a mechanic, which is honest work and work he is actually qualified to do. Meridian Construction survived, barely, but the private equity firm that bought them lost most of their investment, and the company's reputation in the region was permanently damaged. My email, the one I sent on day 11, the one that nobody responded to, became the single most important document in the entire OSHA investigation. It proved that the company had been warned in writing by a certified expert with witnesses and had chosen to ignore the warning. That email was the reason OSHA classified the violation as willful rather than serious, which tripled the fine amount. That email was the reason Bradley received a personal citation. That email was the reason the ironworkers' attorneys were able to pierce the corporate liability shield and go after Meridian's parent company directly. One email, 30 seconds to write, sent by a man who was about to lose his job for doing the right thing. If there is one lesson in this story, it is this: document everything. When you see something wrong, when you are told to do something dangerous, when an incompetent person in authority makes a decision that puts lives at risk, you put it in writing. You send the email. You CC everyone. You create the paper trail. Because one day when the dust settles and the lawyers arrive and everyone is pointing fingers and trying to rewrite history, that email will be the only thing that tells the truth. I was not replaceable. I was never replaceable. No expert is. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you a disaster at a discount. Thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. And if your boss ever tells you that what you do is just pulling levers and pushing buttons, you send that email, you pack your tools, and you walk. Because you cannot fix stupid, but you can make absolutely sure it is documented when stupid burns the house down.